Okay, this review is going to be covering Unit 3 test, which is dealing with North America. So anything we've talked about from the United States and Canada section, that's what this review is going to be going over. Now you'll notice the review looks a little bit different than the ones in the past. This review does not have a vocabulary matching section. I feel like we're kind of looking over that. That might not be something that's helping us out. So I've kind of taken that off. Now if you're wanting a key vocabulary chart to look over, then your vocabulary list that you had, that we've already had a matching vocabulary test over, that would be the one that would be wise to go back and look at. Other than that, all your questions are covered in here. And then you'll notice that I've only included one free response question on the back. We'll talk about that when we get there, but just to reiterate it, but I'm not going to sit here to give you every single free response statement every single time. I'm trying to wean you off of that. So what you've got here is you've got one free response statement in detail of how you're going to see it, and then the other two I've covered throughout the review. So if you look over this review and you study it, then when it comes time for test time, you'll be fine on that, as long as you understand these questions in here. And I've made sure the questions of the free responses are talked about in the review, and then you will have a section here at the end that talks about one free response statement. So don't be surprised. You're still going to have 3 free response questions. Only one of them is given here, but the other ones are talked about and covered within this review. Other than that, it's 28 multiple choice questions, similar setup as the way it has been in the past. Those 28 multiple choice questions will be 75% of your grade, and then the 3 free response questions will be 25% of your grade. The rubric of those 3 free response questions will add up to 25 points. So that's a very big, important part of your test. Those of us that have been taking the free response questions lightly, we need to do a whole lot better job of looking over those. Let's make sure we study for this review, and let's make sure we have a very good test grade this season. All right, your first question is dealing with physical geography. You'll see I've got these laid out. First question is physical geography section. That's what we're going to, the questions on the test that are dealing with the physical geography section, that's what's covered here. So that's what you need to know in regards to physical geography. I've got them numbered here to kind of help you out and to help me out as well, because I have trouble looking at the numbers. So here we go. Number 1, how does elevation affect temperature? Now thinking back to the highland type of climate system, remember, when you have elevation, then everything else goes out of play. Wind systems goes out of play, location on the continent goes out of play, latitude goes out of play, because all we're looking at is elevation. And we know that it changes. And what this question is dealing with is how does it change? And what we need to know is the higher the elevation, the cooler the temperatures. So the higher you are in elevation, the colder the temperature is going to be. And remember, the reason that works is the sun's rays reflect off of the surface of the earth. And so the further away from that reflection that you are, the colder that it is going to be. All right, so the higher up you go, the further from the reflection you are, so the colder the temperature is going to be. Question number 2, what causes climates? I'm looking for all of it here. All right, and there's a lot of different things covered, and you need to name them all. Number 1, you need to know that latitude is the most important effect of climate. Number 2, we also have elevation, and we have a lot of different elevations, specifics, and unique things within the climate in North America, especially the United States. Then we've got wind systems. So different parts, like on the west coast of the United States, sometimes the temperature is different because of the wind systems. We've also got ocean currents. It can be warm water ocean currents, it can be cold water ocean currents. And then you've got position on a continent. Number 3, in the Great Plains region of the United States and Canada, what influences climate the most? Think to the Great Plains region. Pretty flat, not a lot of elevation. Latitude-wise, it's not on the equator, it's kind of in between, so that will have a little bit of play on the climate. Wind systems, probably not so much. That's not going to affect the temperature that much of the Great Plains. Ocean currents, the Great Plains in the middle of the United States and Canada, so that's not going to be it as well. So that leaves us with position on a continent, all right? Our nearness to specific areas in the United States. So within the Great Plains, if you're given a picture of the United States and you've got 2 cities in the Great Plains, probably what you're going to have that's going to affect the climate the most and the most different within the Great Plains is going to be your position on a continent. Number 4, what climate issue causes the location of Canada's cities? It's way too dang cold, so we don't have very many people in far northern Canada. They're more towards the south. Number 5, which place meaning United States or Canada, has more numerous extreme weather events, and why? The United States is going to have more extreme weather events because there's more climate variation in the United States. In Canada, cold basically explains the climate. Now, further south you get, the warmer it is, but calling that warm is still a stretch. But Canada has less dramatic shifts and less dramatic weather events than the United States does, because the United States is so varied, and you're going to have some warmer, you're going to have some colder, you're going to have a mixture of the warm and the cold, like Tornado Alley is going to affect some things as the cold Arctic air mixes with that warm southern air. You're going to have more extreme weather events in the United States. Number 6, what physical features allow the United States and Canada to travel and trade more during its early history? So we're thinking back to the colonization era, and how are these people able to move, and how are they able to transport things? How are they able to control their large territories? It's the water systems, the waterways, access to waterways, access to the ports. Ports can get you out of the United States. The river systems can bring you within the United States and Canada. Waterways were what was so important during the early history, and that's what allowed, physical geography-wise, that's what allowed people to move around more. Question number 2, we're going to be looking at the actual people. Now, I've divided people up into 2 separate sections. The first is government, history, and economics. The second people, which will be on the next video, is population and migration. There's a lot of stuff in regards to the people, and so I broke it up into 2 different questions. First question within people, number 2, is what is urbanization? Urbanization is the idea that cities are growing and that cities are getting bigger and that people are moving from the country and moving to the city as they become more industrialized. So industrialization is fueling urbanization, and urbanization is happening all over the United States and Canada. Think back to that activity that we did when we looked at the data of 1900 cities versus 2010 cities. The 2010 cities were much, much bigger. Not only were they spread out, but population size were triple or quadruple the numbers of the 1900 cities, because urbanization is a lot bigger. Early on in our history, people were coming for the open land, and the rural landscape was the one that was growing, but now cities are growing. They're getting huge. Number 2, what has caused urbanization in the United States? And I kind of just answered that, but again, it's industrialization. That's what caused people to start to move to cities in the first place, because they were after those factory-type jobs. Now we know factory-type jobs aren't in the United States anymore. It's more tertiary and quaternary-type jobs, but that's what started bringing people to cities, was industrialization. Number 3, in regards to the government, how are the United States and Canada similar? We are similar by our democratic institutions. Think back to that government section of our notes and what that's dealing with here. Remember that the United States is a democratic republic. If you're on the federal level of things, then you have more of a republic. If you're on the local level of things, it's more of a democracy where we vote on everything. Federal level, you have representatives. In Canada, you have parliament, which they elect the parliament members. You also have a prime minister who is elected, but then you also have representatives of the monarch who are not elected. So there is some differences there, but what makes them similar government-wise is that they're both democratic types of governments. Number 4, how does cultural convergence come into play with the government types? Remember, cultural convergence is talking about when 2 different cultures come together and they start to mix and they start to blend. So the ideas look very similar. What we see in regards to cultural convergence in government types is the influence from European countries. European countries came up with the idea of democracy. This idea was then spread to the United States and Canada when these European countries colonized the United States and Canada. So whether it be France, whether it be Great Britain, or whether it even be Spain in the southern parts, they brought their democratic type ideals with them. So the cultural convergence we see in regards to government types is our democratic type of ideals. And that's dealing with cultural convergence. Now remember, the difference between convergence and divergence is cultural divergence is when those cultures turn their back on each other and they don't listen to each other. But that didn't really happen in regards to the government with the United States and Canada. Number 5, make sure that you can label the United States and Canada on the economic spectrum. Always, always, always on the economic spectrum, on the left is command economy. Remember, the economic spectrum and the government types are not the same thing. The economic spectrum is not showing you levels of development, It's just showing you how much power the government has in the economy. Far left, you always have command, 100% government control. Far right, you always have free enterprise or free market, 0% government control. Right there in the middle, you always have socialism, where the government controls big business, people can control small business, but when things get too big, the government takes over, the government controls it. The United States is more closer to free enterprise and free market than is Canada. We are not all the way on the far right, but we are close. Again, we are moving more and more left when the government controls the economy more and more, but we are further right than Canada. Canada is closer to socialism than the United States is. So make sure that you identify that in regards to the economic spectrum. Last question, number 6, says, after colonization, how did worldwide trade change? So basically, after Great Britain and France come over and colonize Canada and the United States, how did worldwide trade change? What we're meaning is, how did we trade with Europe now from this point? Because you can't go by land because the North American continent is not connected to Europe. So how did it change? What we had was global maritime networks developed. Basically, that's a fancy way of saying we started trading by ship, all right, globally. You had, because of the Columbian Exchange, you had Europe getting natural resources from the United States and Canada because of slavery from Africa. So you had this maritime trade by sea, this trade network that started to exist after colonization efforts took part. So make sure that you understand that after colonization, globalization really took off, and because of sea trade, hence maritime trade, we were able to reach other places and set up other networks. Question number 3, still dealing with people, now we're looking at population and migration. Number 1, what is the difference between rural and urban? Rural is talking about the countryside. Everything's going to be dealing with farms, with ranching, with not cities. Any transportation is probably going to be done by railroad. Maybe it has some ship, depending on the river systems nearby. But this is the countryside. Urban is dealing with the city. More and more the United States and Canada is becoming urbanized. You're having bigger cities. People are moving from the farm to the cities because less workers are needed on the farm now with commercial farming. Because with commercial farming, you have technology that's taking over and people are starting to move to cities. And because of urbanization, we're having things like pollution. We're building things like malls, buildings, skyscrapers, those types of things. Those are dealing with urbanization. Question 2. When urbanization occurs and cities merge together, what is that called? That term is labeled megalopolis. Remember, a megalopolis is like a mega city. Is these cities coming together and creating one huge, massive city. Bowash is the United States example of a mega city. Boston, Washington, Philadelphia, New York, that area, that's our megalopolis. The Metroplex, not so much just yet. And when we get to East Asia, you're going to have a lot of megalopolises. It's a fun word to say. Number 3, where do megalopolises generally form? Not geographically as in different regions of the world, but within a country, where are you going to have megalopolises form? Like the United States, why is it in the Northeast? You're going to have megalopolises form where transportation routes and major economic development has concentrated. What that means is you have ways to get in and out of that area for trade to exist in that area. You also have economic development opportunities like a lot of jobs available, ways to make money, ways for the economy to get better. And you're going to put a megalopolis in a form where these things exist, where there's a lot of jobs and where transportation is very, very easy to go in and out of those areas. And it also might help to be around some natural resources that you will use in those types of jobs. But that doesn't have to be the case. Number 4, in regards to the population pyramid, how can you see a baby boom? Remember the population pyramid. Population pyramid showed us age, showed us gender on the x-axis, males on the left, females on the right. And we got that from what was called a sex ratio, which is a percentage. We don't have population at the bottom. Generally, it's a sex ratio. It's that percentage of males to the total population to see where we are. Now, what I mean by this question is, how can you see a baby boom? A baby boom always comes after economic success. It is that bulge in the population pyramid. Generally, a baby boom is going to be seen at the top somewhere. That's where they really stick out, because if it's at the bottom, we just see a huge birth rate. But the baby boom, you'll be able to see, and you'll be able to date back to what happened here that made the economy go so well, so that we had a baby boom take place. Now, next part of that question says, in regards to the population pyramid, how can you see a population increase? In other words, how can you see by a population pyramid that the population is actually increasing? And what you're going to see there is a bulge. You're going to see at the bottom, it looks like a triangle. The base of that triangle is getting big. That's showing me the population is increasing. On the flip side of that, which is the last part of this question, how could you see a population decrease? With a population decrease, you're going to see the bottom of that pyramid bend in, which is showing me I don't have a whole lot of percentage of my population here, that it's actually shrinking. All right, and as we go along, and when you get to the AP Human Geography course, you'll start to see that a more developed nation probably has a population decrease. It doesn't look like a pyramid. It looks more universal, more straight up and down. And then you're going to have those baby booms in there. But don't forget about the population pyramid. You're going to see that in each and every unit. Number 5, what is the difference between formal, functional, and perceptual regions? Another thing not to forget. A formal region is a region that you can prove. It's based off of shared characteristics that tie the group together. A functional region, also known as a nodal region, has a central point that is connected somehow, like a highway system. So if you had a map that showed you transportation routes, showed you the centers of those routes and then how those routes existed, that would be a functional map. It has a function, it has a purpose, and it's connected somehow. It's organized around a central point. And then your perceptual region, also known as a vernacular region, is one that's just talking about your ideas, your opinions, things you can't prove about a place. Number 6. What is the difference between adaptation and modification? Adaptation is dealing with you when you are changing the way that you live to exist in an environment. For example, in the West and in the South, when it's really, really hot, air conditioning was developed so that people could live in these areas, that we could change the way we live to actually exist in these areas. So that's an example of an adaptation. Modification is when you actually change the environment to live in an area. A good example of a modification is like with dams put into rivers, like the Hoover Dam. It creates very cheap hydroelectric power. It also creates irrigation so that you can use for farming. Maybe you can use to water public parks, to have fun on, those sorts of things. But that's coming from a modification because you had to modify the environment, stop the flow of the river to put that dam into place, to provide cheap hydroelectric power, and to provide irrigation. Number 7, what advancement accelerated settlement of the West? West meaning United States, or even Canada for that matter, but this question's dealing with Western United States. It was the Transcontinental Railroad. Transcontinental means across the continent. It was the railroad system that was developed that took us from the east to the west. That's what allowed urbanization to really take off in these areas. And remember, each time, which is dealing with the second part of that question, what happened along all of the stops, each time that railroad stopped, cities developed, economies boomed, jobs were available. So we had cities develop along these stops because generally when you're going across a continent, you're going to have to stop and eat and maybe stay in a hotel every once in a while. So along these stops, the economics really took off and cities started to develop. Number 8. Why did people move to the United States and Canada in their beginning? Like in the very, very beginning of the United States and Canada, why did we have people move from Europe? This is not talking about the beginning as in Native Americans crossing the Bering Land Strait. This is the very, very beginning of European colonization. The reason people came over, the main reason was available land coming over for this free, even though there were people here and we kicked them out, but coming over for this free land, so this land that was available for farming. But also some of the other reasons might have been religious reasons, wanting to spread Christianity in these areas. Maybe they were escaping their European government where they didn't have any choice, so they were coming over here for choice. They might also be coming over for riches. But most of the time, people came for the available land, for this abundance of land that they could then use to farm. Number 9, where did the indigenous people come from and how? Or where did the indigenous people come from and how? I read it right the first time. Indigenous people means the people that were first in the area. So what we call the Native Americans. Some people call them the Indians because they think Columbus discovered America, and he really didn't. And he called them the Indians because he thought he was in India, but that's a whole nother discussion. But the Native Americans, where do they come from? These Native Americans came from Asia. They were nomadic peoples that migrated to America by the Bering Land Strait. This Bering Land Strait or land bridge existed because water was trapped in glaciers. As this water was in these glaciers, the water levels were lower. The land around Alaska leading into parts of Russia are lower, and so when this water level was lower, there was actually a land bridge that developed. So these Asians migrated down into the United States, and then eventually migrated to Canada, and then eventually down into the United States, forming the Indian tribes of where they existed, and what we know today. Number 10, where are the highly urban areas in Canada and why? A population density map of Canada, where is the population going to be most dense and why? The answer is close to the United States. The reason along the border of the United States that Canada has most of their major cities is because of warmth and because of trade, but mainly because of warmth. It's warmer in these areas because it's closer latitude-wise to that low latitude zone. So the further south is where your highly dense areas of Canada are, and the further north you go, the less dense the areas are and the more rural they are. But your urbanization is happening closer to the United States, also for trade purposes, but a lot of it has to do with the climate. Number 11, what is the difference between a province and a territory? The answer is easy. Population size. A province and a territory are both organizational methods within Canada to organize its people. Within a province, you have enough people to organize them into these different regions so that they can have local representation. But a territory is just saying, we have enough land here for a province, but we don't have enough people to have their own separate area, so we call it a territory. More likely than not, like in Nunavut's case, it is a territory because it's mainly made up of indigenous people, so they've grouped together regionally, but they don't really have any government representation. They don't have local types of governments because they don't have enough people in them. So population size is your answer there. Number 12, why did people migrate west? United States and Canada, all right? We talked about how the Transcontinental Railroad helped that, but they migrated west. Part of it was for gold in California. Remember the gold rush? Maybe new land, different lands that they were opening up with different homestead acts and giving this land away. Maybe it was just a new start. They were tired of where they were. They wanted to get a new start with their family, so they were going west. And again, railroads helped this, and cities developed along all of these different stops. Number 4, really short. There's only 3 questions, but I couldn't group it with any of the other ones, and it's coming from our current events lesson. Number 1, what is NAFTA? NAFTA is the North American Free Trade Agreement. This is an agreement that developed and exists between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. I know Mexico's in the Latin America unit, but they are part of NAFTA as well. And what this is this let go of and got rid of all of the trade restrictions between these 3 nations. It opened up a free trade, hence North American Free Trade Agreement, between these 3 countries so that the economy of North America as a whole would get better. So there wouldn't be tariffs or restrictions on trade or anything like that between these 3 countries, so that what you had is a free trade zone. This helped companies because it developed more customers. Presently, what you see is the United States takes advantage of Mexico's cheap labor force, and the United States factories are located in Mexico, and then the goods that's produced are then shipped back to the companies in the United States for mass production, or for mass selling, really. But it is a free trade restriction zone. Now, this is different than the European Union. In the European Union, people can migrate between all the countries in the European Union and work wherever they want. In the NAFTA, that's not the case. Workers have to have visas, and you can't just go back and forth across borders for no reason. Number two, what did NAFTA do? I pretty much answered that, but again, it lifted those trade restrictions, it lifted those trade bans, and it enabled the economies of these three countries to really grow and succeed. And that was the whole purpose behind it, was so that the economies of these three nations would become some of the world's best. And again, I answered that in question one, just kind of getting ahead of myself. Number three, what does Quebec seek presently and why? Quebec is wanting independence from Canada. They want their own government. They want their own country. The reason they want this is because it's predominantly a French culture. The rest of Canada is predominantly an English culture, and Quebec's kind of separate from that. Their background, their ethnicities are a little bit different than the other parts of Canada, and so they want to unite and have some of the shared goals within this country itself of Quebec. Now, this movement takes place every 5, 6, 7 years, and it gets really close, and they're pushing for another separatist independence movement. And again, it gets close every single time. Now, Canada doesn't want to let it go because the Quebec area is one of the southern provinces, which is where some of the bigger cities are. And that's a huge economy hit that Canada would take. Their economy would take a huge hit if they lost the government or the country of Quebec. So what you need to recognize is that Quebec is seeking freedom from Canada because of their shared culture of French. Now again, free response questions. I'm giving you one free response question. There are three. The other two I've already covered in our review here, but there are three different free response questions. I don't want you to think there's only one on the review, so there's only going to be one on the test. No, there's three on the test. This is just one. I'm being nice, giving you one of the three so that you're not going into it blind like we will from here on out. All right, this free response question says, immigration has come in waves to the United States, and each wave differed from the other. Letter A. Remember, when you answer these, you need to answer these in this format, A, B, C, D. Letter A. In the 18th and 19th centuries, list two push factors that caused immigration into the region. Notice that it says push, and it does say list. So this can be a list. You don't have to go into detail of explaining why it happened. You're just listing. Push factors are negative factors. So if you give me anything that is positive in this answer, it's incorrect. So if you list one push and one pull, you get 1 point. You don't get both points. Some of the things that you can put from the 18th and the 19th centuries. This is the 17th and 1800s. This is what we're looking at here. Some of the push factors, people were leaving Europe during this time period. That's the immigrants into the United States and Canada. So it could have been they were escaping their controlling governments. They were looking for kind of freedom. It could be that their areas were under famine, which means they don't have food around. In Ireland, there was a potato famine, and people lived off of these potatoes. And because of this potato famine, much of the potato crops were wiped out. So people left Ireland, and even Germany had a potato famine as well. They left Germany and Ireland and came to the United States because they were starved, basically, in Germany and Ireland. Maybe they were escaping subsistence agriculture and wanting to come over here because, especially when you get into the 19th century, the late 1800s, urbanization or industrialization is starting to take place, so maybe they were looking for those types of jobs. Maybe they were leaving wars, different wars being fought, or maybe they were leaving persecution because of their religion. Letter B, in the 18th and 19th century, still dealing with the 17th and 1800s, list, again, I'm just wanting a list, two pull factors that caused immigration to the region. These are positives. Must give me positives here. Some things that you can give me from the 17 and 1800s. Pull factor, free land. A lot of open land. Maybe a new start. Religious freedom. There was no set predominant religion in the area at the time. The government was not controlling what religion you were going to practice, so if you were starting a new faith or if you wanted to escape persecution, you could be coming for the religious freedom. As time went on, you may be coming for the secondary types or primary and secondary types of economic activities, because as time went on during the 1700s and 1800s, industrialization started to take place, so maybe you were coming for those secondary type of jobs. And another pull factor would be freedom and liberty. When the United States did set up its government, it was set up on the principles of freedom and liberty. You can vote, you can have freedoms, you're not pushed, you're not controlled. So maybe that was a pull factor for coming over here. Letter C, in the 20th and 21st centuries, this is the 1900s and the 2000s, list 2 push factors that caused immigration into the region. Push factors, negative things that made immigration happen in the 1900s and 2000s, early 2000s. A push factor during this time period could be primary and secondary economic activities, because most of the immigrants during this time period are from Latin America and Asia, and by now they have primary and secondary economic activities, so the push factor would be getting away from these types of jobs. Push factor could be controlling governments, getting away from their governments that were communists, that were dictators, getting away from those. Another could be women's rights, because in a lot of these countries that they came from, women do not have rights, so that could be pushing them away. Maybe it's just that they're leaving a less developed nation that doesn't have any health care, and they're leaving that area because they want to live longer. Maybe it's because their areas are highly polluted. If you're coming from China during this time period, smog is massive pollution-wise, and so people are escaping. People could be escaping the pollution of the area. Letter D, in the 20th and 21st, 19 and 2000s, what list 2 pull factors that caused immigration into the region? We're looking for positives here. These are positive things that draw people to the area in the 1900s and 2000s. Tertiary and quaternary economic activities. Maybe you are seeking those types of jobs. Maybe you're seeking capitalism, getting away from your type of government and coming to more of a capitalist type government. Maybe it was for health care. You're coming over for better doctors. Maybe you're coming over for rights, more freedom. Maybe you're coming for women's rights, that women could grow economically. Maybe for the different social services that are around in the United States during this time period, free health care, anything dealing with social services. Maybe your country did not have them and you're looking for them here. Maybe just entertainment purposes, more things to do. Then letter E, list where immigrants came from in the 18th and 19th centuries, and also list where they came from the 20th and 21st. So we're looking for a list for both of these. In this, you'll say in the 18th and 19th century, most of the immigration was coming from Europe. In the 20th and 21st centuries, most of the immigration is coming from Latin America and Asia. It's important that you identify both of those. Again, 18th and 19th century coming from Europe, 20th and 21st century coming from Latin America and Asia. Make sure that you get that down. And again, most of these in this question is a list. You're not doing a whole lot of explaining. There's 5 parts, A, B, C, D, E. Make sure that you list all 5 parts. Let's make sure we study for this test and do a very good job so that we all can have great grades this 6 weeks.